Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, so just to recap the last thing that we talked about last lesson. So remember we talked about the idea of debts and we call them liabilities. And we said that the idea is that, according to Hanafis, having a debt is something which is known as, or is the same as a haja asliya. Meaning, having a debt means that you have a liability that you have to pay. So therefore, that is like having the need for clothing or having the need for, food and all that. Yeah, because without these things, your life would become very difficult. So therefore, the debt is considered to be deductible from the assets. And then we said, what kind of debts will be considered to be acceptable? We said only those debts where the person demanding is a human being. Yeah, so as opposed to those debts where Allah is the one that's demanding. So like nazar and kafara, those are not considered to be liabilities and debts. So we said there's a little ikhtilaf between the dayn of zakat and istihlak. Like if you were to, after your zakat has become necessary, you haven't given your zakat, the next year's come. And so we said here, this is considered to be a liability. So it can be deducted from the next year's. And as for if a person deliberately, they were to destroy the wealth, then we said this is considered to be something which is, this is going to be considered to be something which is also a liability as well. But there's a difference. Imam Zufar says no, these two things are not liabilities, whereas Imam Abu Yusuf said istihlak is not a liability. Okay, anyway, so today's masala is to do with what the haja asliya is. So as we know, as human beings, we have needs, and there's lots of needs that we all have, and the Sharia takes those needs into consideration. Okay, so for example, we all need a roof over our heads. Like we need somewhere to live. There might be someone who might say we don't need a roof over our head. We can live in the wilderness. We can live under the trees. We can live in caves, and so forth. But this does not seem to go according to the practicality of things. So for instance, like humans, obviously, there are some humans on earth that still live in trees. Yeah, they just build for themselves some structure in a tree and they live in a tree. And society has developed over the years, so humans need to live in various. So this is why the Sharia takes into consideration the changes of society as well. This is a very important thing that people need to understand when they're studying fiqh, which is to what extent in change in society is something which is allowed in Sharia. Yeah, what kind of change? So for example, like 200 years ago in the UK, in England, 200 years ago, fruits like pineapples, mangoes, these were unheard of. They were only eaten by the rich. And so therefore, now it's just considered to be like normal food now. And likewise, having a big feast and a meal, this was something that was very rare for an average person to be able to consume. And the same goes with like having multiple pairs of clothes. This was something that only kings had, rich people had. And nowadays it's considered the average person has multiple pairs of clothes. And so all of these things have to be taken into consideration when you want to try and understand fiqh rulings. Yeah. So like I said, there might be someone who says, you don't need a house to live in. You can live in the jungle. You can live in the forest. You can live in, you can just live on the street somewhere. Just put something over your head. But we said this is not what the Sharia wants. The laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be implemented in any society, anywhere around the earth. Yeah. So in the time of the Sahaba, their houses might have been built from mud and mortar and bricks and all that. But ours is built differently. So this is why laysa fi duri sukna, there is no zakat, right, in the house for living in. What does that mean, house for living in? So as I told you before, mafhum al-mukhalafa, which was what was that translation again? Was it proto-positive or proto-negative? Was that it? Yeah. Was that the definition that Z Arabi was saying? Proto-positive, yeah. So mafhum al-mukhalafa, like we take that into consideration, but we don't take into consideration when mafhum mukhalafa Oh, contrapositive, yeah, contrapositive. So, Jazakallah khair. So, mafhum mukhalafa is only taken into consideration when it does not clash with mantuq, with a clear explicit statement. Yeah, like for example, if I say to you, you can't eat food in the classroom, and then I say, you can only eat in the kitchen. So if I said to you, you can't eat food in the classroom, then the mafhum mukhalaf of that would be, you can eat outside the classroom. But because I've got the other statement which says you can only eat in the kitchen, that overrides everything. Okay? So the same thing over here, laysa fi dur sukna. There is no zakat when it comes to dur is the jama of dar. Yeah? So residence of sukna or properties for residential purposes. There's no zakat in this. So that means if there is a property which is for rental purposes or for selling, then is there zakat in there? So not necessarily. Okay, so there will be zakat if it comes to something which is bought with the intention of selling. That's going to come in the whole chapter of urud al-tijara, yeah, stock and inventory. So laysa fi duri sukna, basically any property that you have which is not for which has not been purchased to sell, then there's no zakat in it. Yeah, the only property that you have to give zakat on is a property that you bought, like an estate agent. You bought a property with the intention of fixing it up and selling it off. That's it. So again, this is also something which is important to understand, which is, like, I have a car and I've had my car for about 2 or 3 years now. So I might say to myself, you know what, after a few years I might sell the car. And nearly everyone, when they buy a car or they buy a house, they have the intention of later on selling it. So is that intention considered to be, so we said no. That is considered to be a long-term asset. Yeah, long-term. So long-term investments are considered to be non-zakatable. Short-term investments are considered to be zakatable. And like, how do you decide what is long-term, what is short-term? Obviously, this is an ijtihadi issue. Like for example, I've got a car and I want to sell it, after a few years. So here again, this would differ from things to item to item. Yeah. So, some people want a property, they want to buy a property, fix it up, and then sell it after 1 or 2 years when the prices go up. Yeah. So again, that would be based upon that. So there's an organization called IOFI, IOFI, or IOFI, AOIFI, something like that. You can look it up. And this is basically a group of scholars. And Mufti Taqi Usmani is part of it, and there's many other, Sheikh Yaqub Nizami is part of it. And they generally give like an official verdict on certain problems that are facing the world when it comes to financial issues. And amongst them, zakat issues as well. Yeah, so they kind of mention things like long-term debts, short-term debts, long-term investments, short-term investments, and so forth. What about renting? So renting, if you give a property out to rent, there's no zakat on rental property because that is considered to be your hajat al-asliyah. That's something that you need in order to get money. So that thing itself is, like you can say, the tool for you to be able to get so whatever tools you're using, you don't have to give zakat on those. So your house is like your tool, it's like your machine. So laysa fi duri sukna. So there is no zakat on the property that for rental purposes, or property as long as it's not for sale purposes. وَثِيَابِ الْبَدَنِ, and clothing for the body. So again, clothing for the body, mafhum mukhalafa would mean if you have clothes at home which are not for the body. I mean, obviously all clothes are for the body. What it means is that any clothing which has been bought with the intention of selling. Yeah, so if you bought any clothes with the intention of selling, then there's zakat on there, because that now becomes business asset. وأثاث المنزل, أثاث, furniture of a house, of houses. دواب الركوب, and dawab meaning animals for riding. So in the olden days they had camels and horses and mules. In today's times we have cars. So if a person has a horse which is going to be expensive, or a camel which is going to be very expensive, do they have to give zakat on it? So they don't have to give zakat on it. Yeah, even if it's expensive. Yeah, so like nowadays, if a person has a very expensive car, £50,000 car, £100,000 car, do they have to give zakat on it? No, they don't. They don't have to. Dawabul manzil, dawabul rukub, sorry. There's no zakat in there. Yeah, because all of these kind of come under the hajatul asliya. And we said humans require this for them to be able to function in the day. Yeah, so you need your house, you need your clothes for your body. Otherwise, you're exposing your body to the elements. Athath al manzil, like someone can say, oh, you don't need furniture. You can have a house and just sleep on the floor. Yeah, you can just, when guests come to your house, tell them, this is, I don't know, Sahaba style, like they say. This is Sahaba style, you sit on the floor. Well, it wasn't Sahaba style, Sahaba had furniture. But some people think that, this is how we should live. And that's not the case. Yeah, so all of these things, there's no zakat in there. Abid al-khidma, so abid, so slaves of khidma, meaning those slaves that are not for sale purposes. So any slaves that you have, then there is no zakat on them. وَالسِّلَاحِ al-isti'mal, and silah, weapons which are there for usage. Yeah, so weapons that are there for usage as opposed to weapons that are there for selling. Yeah, so khulas of all this is anything that you have which is not being purchased to sell, then there is no zakat on it. However, just one little point. If you have these things and you have more than your need, then that may prevent you from receiving zakat. Yeah, so if there's a person and they have, let's say, 2 cars, one car they use and another car they hardly use, then there may be they are not allowed to take zakat. So one is giving zakat and one is receiving zakat. To receive zakat, according to the Hanafis, you don't need to have mal-nami, you don't need to have productive wealth. Right, those 8 things that we mentioned, or 7, you don't need to have those. If you have just like lots of pairs of clothes at home, and let's say, for example, 60% of the clothes that you have at home, you don't wear them, but you're the owner of them, and their value goes beyond the threshold, then you can't receive zakat. Yeah. So again, this is where the issue arises. So why is it that these things that he's mentioned and others, like we said, if you have a house, if you have watches or mobile phones and these things, these are for use, then there's no zakat. لأنها مشغولة, because these things are used, preoccupied, بالحاجة الأصلية. Yeah, when it comes to haja asliya, the haja, the need, the basic human need that everyone needs it for. Remember I said basic human need means could differ from society to society. Like for example, if you went to a village in, I don't know, the desert somewhere, their hajatul asliya might be different. And if you went to, London in a posh area in London, their hajatul asliya might be different. Yeah, so hajatul asliya can differ from place to place. وَلَيْسَتْ بِنَامِيَةٍ أَيْضًا. And on top of all of that, these things are not considered to be mal-nami. Yeah, so mal-nami, remember we said productive. These are not productive, as in they're not intrinsically, yeah, remember nami, 3 things. They're not like gold and silver, which is intrinsically productive. And they're not like business assets that become productive. And they're not livestock, yeah, which can potentially give birth. So they don't fall under that, therefore there is no zakat in these. لَيْسَتْ بِنَامِيَةٍ أَيْضًا. وَعَلَى هَذَا كُتُبُ. Now here a question is raised. What about, for example, books of knowledge? Yeah, so books of knowledge meaning like, hadith books, tafsir books, aqidah books, these kind of things. What about these kind of books? If a person has these, do they have to give zakat in those? And obviously, if you don't have them for selling purposes, if they're not there to sell, then there's no zakat on them. But if a person has these books and is a scholar, so you got loads of books. Some scholars, they've got like lots of books, like £10,000 worth of books, or 20,000 or 50,000 pound worth of books. Yeah, that's a big deal of money. So are they allowed to receive zakat? So I say yes, they are, because that's haja asliya for the scholars. The scholars need all that. Yeah, you need all of that. So this is why it says, ala hadha, based upon this, kutubul ilmi, books of knowledge for its people, meaning its people are the scholars. So if, for example, like there is someone who is not a scholar and he has loads of books, yeah, someone who is not a scholar and has loads of books, then in that case, what's going to happen? So that person, the Hanafi say, will not be allowed to receive zakat. Yeah, he has to sell those books first of all, and then if he's still under the threshold, then he can take zakat. Yeah, otherwise he can't. And so in today's times, like this is like Another thing which applies in today's times as well. Like for instance, they might be in a kitchen. You might have like really expensive equipment in the kitchen, a cooker. You might have like some, I don't know, some other machines that are quite expensive. But these are all needed, right? So this is why alat al-muhtarifin as well, the tools of the skilled tradesman. So muhtarif is a skilled tradesman, like someone who is like a professional. A doctor might have certain tools he has to purchase or owns them. Or for example, a mechanic, he owns, in his garage, he's got the building, he's got the tools. Or for example, like even someone who has got a big factory, owns a big factory. He's got a big factory, and in the factory there's machinery. So the rule basically is that anything which is a fixed asset, anything that's a fixed asset, building and everything that comes with it, all the machinery in the building, there's no zakat in this. Yeah, there's no zakat in this, as long as it's not for sale. And like some of the books, they've actually made it easy to understand. So they say anything that you have that perishes, there's no zakat on it. Yeah, but anything that you have that does not perish, and you bought it to sell, then there is zakat on it. Yeah, so this is to do with like inventory. So for example, like let's say you own, I don't know, a washing company, and you have to buy lots of soap, yeah, detergents and all that stuff. You got to pay for the water, blah blah blah, all that. Do you have to pay zakat on all the soap? So let's say you got lots of soap, you bought a whole truckload of soap and detergents and whatnot. Do you have to give zakat on all that? So Hanafi say, no, you don't, because these things perish when you use them. They're not really part of the end product, right? They're like the means to reach the end product. So that's why there's no zakat on these. However, if for example, like they say you had something like a dye, so you purchase you dye cloth, so you purchase dye, and then you use that dye in that cloth, that would be considered to be zakatable. Why? Because that dye is considered to be something which is remaining. It's something which is in the final product. Yeah. So paint, if you had paint and you paint buildings and you've got loads of paint, you'd have to give zakat on that. Similar goes things like, what if you bake cakes at home? If you bake cakes as a business at home, do you have to give zakat on the cooker? No. Do you have to give zakat on the whisk and the machine that does all the kneading and all that? No, you don't have to. But you would have to give zakat if you bought any ingredients with the intention of selling. Yeah, so any ingredient that you purchased. So for example, let's say you went to the shop, someone gave you an order of a cake, and you went to the shop to buy flour or to buy other things, or you bought a big bulk load of stuff. You'd have to give zakat on those, because those were purchased with the intention of. Do they understand that? Yeah. So these kind of questions are a lot. Some people do like Etsy. They do Etsy and they make little kind of things, creative arts, and they sell those. So if you have all these bits that you purchase with the intention of selling, you'd have to give zakat on all that. I'm just trying to think of anything else that people have. I mean, if you're a mechanic, you obviously in your shop you're going to have parts that you're going to be selling, tires. So those things, there's zakat on those. So the guy would have to work out how much inventory they have, because that doesn't come under hajat al-asliyah. All right, they don't come under hajat al-asliyah. But if you had like a pump that's going to be used to pump the tires, then there's no zakat on that pump, because that's not the hajat. That's the hajat al-asliyah that is. That's not in the final product. They don't understand this idea of. Yeah, so this is why alat al-muhtarifin, this is something which is important to understand in today's times, because there's so many different like types of businesses people have opened up, and they're running them from home. They don't realize sometimes that you have to give zakat. Like sometimes people, especially in Ramadan, they sell samosas. Yeah, they sell food. Again, so if you purchase the ingredients with the intention of selling them, then and your zakat time comes, you'd have to give zakat on the value of the ingredients. Yeah. What about food for animals of sale? Okay, so if it's considered to be the food which the animal is going to eat, and it's going to, like, obviously to survive, then there's no zakat in there. Yeah, there's no zakat in that because that's considered to be to allow the animal to live, to survive. The animals digest and grow. So I don't think generally people don't give the food to make it grow. As in, it's not really kind of the sale is not on the growth necessarily on all animals. It's usually on just keeping it alive. Yeah, but if there is obviously clearly animals where food is given to increase, then possibly there would be zakat in there. But generally, I think people don't do that. They have birds. People sell birds, sell cats, sell dogs, and they buy food and give it. Does everyone understand? I'm just trying to think. Is there any like complicated, like kind of business kind of thing that people generally? There is no zakat on things like which are manual labor. So if you're owed money because of manual labor, there's no zakat in that. Okay, yeah, because that's not considered to be like an asset. It's not considered to be something which is tangible. Like it can't be weighed and measured. Okay, there were some other things I was going to mention, but I don't know. I might leave that until urud, when we do urud, business stock. Let's just see if there's anything. Yeah, so like for example, Binaya gives some examples. Yeah, he gives some good examples. He says, Alat al-muhtarifin, like Qudoor al-tabbakhin, the pots and pans used by chefs. Sabbaghin, the ones who dye cloth. Qawarir al-attarin, like the glass bottles that are used by perfume sellers. Yeah, what about those? So obviously, if you're gonna give the glass bottle to the person, right, with the perfume in there, then clearly there's zakat on the perfume, and there's also zakat on the glass bottle as well. Alatun najarin, yeah, so tools of a carpenter. ظروف الأمتعة في الدخيل لو اشترى جوالق ب10 درهم. Yeah. Okay, anyway. So then he says, lima qulna, yeah, because of what we said. Was there anything else? Yeah, so there's a little section, you can read this yourselves, I don't want to go into this. So in Raddul Muhtar, basically, this is the summary of what he says. He basically says that, look, imagine if you have 2 copies of a Nahu book. You got a Nahu book, but you got 2 copies of a Nahu book. Does that mean now you're not eligible to receive zakat if you're poor? Yeah. And likewise, if you've got like books of medicine, or you've got books and you're not a doctor, you've got books of medicine and these things, and maybe even if you are a doctor. So here, this kind of discussion that they have regarding this, because he says some things which seem a bit bizarre. Yeah. So he says, وَالَّذِي يَقْتَدِيهَا النَّظَرْ أَنَّ نُسْخَةً مِنْ نَحْوٍ, if a person has a copy of Nahu, 2 copies, there's ikhtilaf in this, لا تُعْتَبَرْ في النصاب, and likewise books of usul fiqh and books of kalam that don't contain like other opinions outside the sharia. So if you've got books like of deviant sects in your house, so then he kind of like comes to the conclusion, well, then you got to give zakat on it. Now this is a bit of a strange one, because it's like, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line between something being something you haja? Like sometimes I have a book, I might not even realize that I need that book now, but maybe later on, years later, I realize I need that book. Yeah. So again, this kind of thing where it might differ from person to person. Yeah. So you might have some books lying around in your house, or even like some items lying around in your house, like a tool in the shed you've hardly ever used, and you might only need to use it like once on your roof tiling or something. Yeah. So again, all of these things, I would say, the fuqaha, when they mention these kind of masail, you have to understand they're talking about their times. So they're talking about people living in a specific society, having a specific way of life, and the books were not really kind of printed as well. They weren't printed books; they were handwritten books. So there's a whole different like a way the society used to run as well. In our society, it's different. So, for example, you could have two mobile phones. One could be for work. One could be out of date. Yeah, because nowadays when people make things, they make things that have short term, like short term life. Yeah, short term usage. So you have something which is disposable. You have a mobile phone that works, and now you have to update it for the new version. Yeah, the other one is cracked or something. Or so again, there's a lot of these. And TV, for example, let's say someone has a TV in their house, two TVs in their house. Is that beyond their needs? Do they only need one TV? Yeah. So you'll see these in the books of fiqh, and they do sound sometimes bizarre. Like some people counting how many beds do you have in your house? Right, or you got one extra one. There's only in the house. There's only 3 people living in the house, and you got an extra room, or you got an extra this or extra that. Okay. لما قلنا ومن له على آخر دين. Okay, let's say a person has a debt upon someone else. Oh, one of the things the Hanafis do not consider a haja asliya, which the Shafis do, is gold and silver. So the Shafis and the Malikis, they say that if a woman has gold and she wears the gold for majority of the year, then she counts that as a hajat al-asliya. Yeah, she doesn't give zakat on it. But we don't consider that as hajat al-asliya, because we say the rule of gold and silver overrides everything. Gold and silver in any situation, you have to give zakat on that, right? Unless it's something which is like small in quantity, that it's not measurable, like gold plating, or like we're going to come in the chapter of gold, something which is less than 12 karat gold. Yeah, then we say there's no zakat on that. Yeah, so that's going to come separately, but just keep that in mind. Those don't necessarily come under hajat al-asliya. Okay, man lahu ala akhar dain. So let's say there's a person and lahu ala akhar dain, and he owes. So lahu, when it comes to lahu and the word debt comes in there, it means is owed. Ala akhar, upon another person, meaning someone owes another person. So let's say someone owes me. Let's say, for example, Zafar owes me £1,000. And I keep saying, Zafar, you owe me, and for years he's been denying it. Jahadahu, sinin. So 10 years have gone by, and every year, or every time I see him, he denies that I owe him. ثُمَّ قَامَتْ لَهُ بَيِّنَةٌ. And then after 10 years, I managed to find proof. Bayyina means evidence. To prove that he does owe me. So after 10 years, I managed to find a guy or 2 guys, took him to court, and I said to the judge, look, this is my proof. This guy owes me, and the judge gave in my favor, ruled in my favor, and I won the case. Yeah. So now what's going to happen now? After 10 years, he gives me that money now. So Zafar has given me the money after 10 years. The problem now is, do I have to backdate all those years? Because technically it belonged to me, isn't it? It was mine. I was the owner. But it's just I didn't have possession of it. So he says no. Lam yuzakkihi lima mada. Why is this for? It should be the case that you have to give it. Because we talked about this before. We said receivables. When you have receivables, there is zakat on receivables. So if I've given someone money, yeah, and I get that money back after 10 years, I have to give zakat on it. Yeah, because it's mine. And the 7 conditions are there. Hurrun, balighun, aqilun, milkun tam, etc. 1 year's passed. So why is this? So he says, ma'nahu sarat lahu bayyinatun. So qamat lahu bayyinatun, he says, what this qamat lahu bayyinatun means is sarat lahu bayyina. Yeah. So he interprets this qamat lahu bayyina as so like I didn't have proof, and all of a sudden proof came into existence. How is that proof? So there's, in court cases, normally there's 2 ways that you can prove something. Yeah. Well, there's 3 ways you can prove something. but two normal ways. So I'll mention the three. So let's say, for example, like I am a plaintiff and Zafar is the defendant, and we go to court. So let's say, for example, like I don't know, Amina is the judge. So we go to the courts and we say, okay, Amina's going to say to me, okay, what's the case? And I say, Zafar owes me £1,000 and he's not giving me. And Zafar says, no, I don't owe him. Yeah, okay, that's fine. The judge is going to say, Amina's going to say, al-bayyinatu al-mudda'i, the plaintiff has to provide evidence, and the other person, and if he doesn't have evidence, then the other person, Zafar, has to swear an oath. So I say, I don't have a bayyinah, I don't have any proof. So now, if I have proof, I win the case. If I don't have proof, Zafar automatically wins the case if he swears an oath. So if he swears an oath and says, Wallahi, I don't owe him a penny, yeah, he wins the case. Third, if he refuses to swear an oath, we call this a nukul, nakala. If he refuses to swear an oath, then automatically I win the case. Because by him refusing to swear an oath, it shows that I am correct. So either I provide a bayyinah, number two, if I don't have a bayyinah, he swears an oath, in which case he's going to win. Or number three, if he doesn't swear an oath, then by default I win the case. Yeah, these are normally three ways. There's a fourth way as well. This is called iqrar. Iqrar is basically when a person confesses. The only difference is in fiqh that if something is established through iqrar, yeah, through self-confession, that ruling will be restricted to that individual. It can't be applied to another person. Okay, so what does this mean then? Let's say two people rob a bank and the authorities catch them. Person A, he confesses, I robbed the bank with B, and B doesn't say anything. The courts will arrest A and will obviously carry out the punishment on A. B won't get punished. B cannot get punished for the confession of A. Yeah, so iqrar is considered to be something which is restricted to the individual themselves. Yeah, they call it hujjatun qasira. Hujjatun qasira. And as for providing witnesses, testimony, yeah, testimony can actually apply to yourself and it can also apply to other people as well. Yeah, so that's the difference between the two. Anyway, everyone understand that? So now he said, this is why, like I said before, you need to understand how a court system works. A lot of these masail have to be seen in a court, right, for you to make sense of them. So he says, what happens is after 10 years, I provide evidence that Zafar. So ma'na sarat lahu bayyina. Either I have a bayyina. How is that? Bi'an aqarra inda nas. Such that, for example, like let's say one day I found someone who said, yes, I heard Zafar tell people that he owes me money. And I get two witnesses, two male witnesses, or one male and two female witnesses to prove this. Bi'an aqarra inda nas. Yeah. So this is what happens. Yeah. What does that mean? It means that I win the case now because I've provided evidence to the courts through this. Now, but still, going back to the original question, does everyone understand that or shall I say again? Does that make sense about how this whole masala works? It's, like I said, it's important to understand how the court system works. Okay. Now, going back to the original masala. So Zafar, technically that money is mine. It's been 10 years been with Zafar. Simply Zafar has been denying it. And I haven't been able to prove it in court. Eventually I was able to prove it. So Saratul Bayna Bayaqarran. So we say here mas'alatu mal-ud-dimar. This mas'ala is actually what we call mal-ud-dimar. Dimar, it means something that's hidden. Yeah, like lost property. So the rule basically is that how do you become an owner of something? Yeah, how do you become an owner of something? Like how do you establish ownership? So ownership can be done in several ways. Like one way ownership can be done is if you find something that no one owns and you claim ownership to it. Like for example, you go to the forest, you kill an animal, you hunt a deer, now it's become yours now, right? So you become the rightful owner. Another second way that you can become an owner of something is if you obviously receive ownership from another person. Yeah, so like for example, you bought something of someone. Ownership. You were gifted something from someone, ownership. You inherited something of someone, ownership. Yeah, so these are like, or you came into some sort of like an agreement with someone, like mahar, married a man, received mahar, or you out of court settlement. These are like 5 or 6 ways that you can actually. These are known as al-muawadat. Muawadat are those ways that people can become owner of something. Okay, so these types of ownership that you have. So you have, like, for example, like we said, gifting, you have trade, buying and selling, you have inheritance, you have out of court settlements, you have hunting, yeah. And likewise, also another way that you can become an owner is where you forcefully take something off someone in foreign lands. So the Muslims go and attack a non-Muslim state. They take their property and bring it back to Muslim land. It now becomes theirs. This is called ihraz. Okay, ihraz. You basically go to a foreign land, take it, and likewise, if they were to come to your land and take your stuff and take it back to their land, it becomes theirs now. Yeah. So these are certain ways that you have ownership, obviously. Now, what happens is that if, for example, like you lost hope that you're ever going to get something back, then you assume that as being destroyed. That's as good as imagining it's destroyed. So we call this mal-ud-dimar. This is known as a mas'ala of dimar. So dimar basically is like a umbrella ruling for all those items of property that have gone out of your hand, right? Someone else has taken it, and you've lost all hope that you're going to get it back. So, for instance, the example they give is like this. Let's say, for example, like I have a mobile phone, for example. Oh, forget mobile phone. Let's just say, let's use something zakat. So I have, I don't know, 1 kilo of gold, and I give that kilo of gold to Khalida, and I say to Khalida, okay, here's a kilo of gold, and then I give it to her to borrow. So it's not to transfer ownership; it's just to borrow. She's taken it, and what's happened is, I feel really embarrassed of asking her back for it. I keep feeling embarrassed asking her back. So then I just say to myself, you know what, chalo, it's gone. Yeah, I won't ask for it. I'll assume it's gone in my head. And then 10 years later, she comes back to me and goes to me, here you go, here's your gold that I borrowed from you. Right, I get it back. So do I have to give zakat in all those years? No. Mal-ud-dimar. It comes under mal-ud-dimar. Does everyone understand the concept of mal-ud-dimar? Yeah. So mal-ud-dimar is this idea that you have something that you own, but it's gone out of your ownership now. It's no longer something that you have anymore. And because of that, they say you've lost the raja of it, you lost hope of it. Then now it's become as though you don't own it, you haven't had it. So therefore, even if you get it back, you don't have to give those years of zakat on it. Now, there's ikhtilaf in some of these scenarios. What I'll do is, let me explain this masala, and then after that I'll talk about the ikhtilafs in this. وفيه خلاف الزفر والشافعي رحمه الله. So Imam Zufar and Imam Shafi, first of all, they have an ikhtilaf with us on this masala of dimar. Yeah. So I borrowed Zafar money. Zafar has now denied. After 10 years, I found evidence to prove that he does owe me. Imam Zufar and Shafi rahimahullah, they say no. They say that there is no concept of mal-ud-dimar, in the sense that if you get your money back, you have to give zakat on it. So I have to backdate 10 years of zakat on this. Yeah, that's why it says fi khilaf Zufar wa Shafi. Now, if you look in the Hashi, it actually says wa Shafi fil jadid. Yeah, meaning this is the Shafi opinion when he went to Egypt. So Imam Shafi, in the year roughly 196, he, after studying from Imam Muhammad died in 189 roughly. So Imam Shafi in Baghdad, he established a madhab there. Right? This was known as the Qadim madhab of the Shafi. And then in the year 200, he went to Egypt and he revised a lot of opinions in his madhab. And they call this the Jadid madhab of Shafi. So he's saying this opinion of his is actually in the Jadid madhab. It seems as though the Qadim madhab was close to what the Hanafis were saying. In fact, a lot of opinions in the Shafi madhab, the Qadim opinions are in line with the Hanafi position. Yeah, because Imam Muhammad was his teacher, Imam Shafi's teacher. So, okay. Now, what kind of things come under mal-ud-dimar? So, the kind of things that come. Now, the reason why the Zufar and Shafi say there's no concept of mal-ud-dimar, because they say you owned it, and even if you get it back after 10 years, you still own it. So, you owned it before 10 years, and you owned it after 10 years, so therefore it was yours. And that's the qiyas that is. وَمِن جُمْلَتِهِ, and from the types of mal-ud-dimar is al-mal mafqud, lost property. So, let's say, for example, I don't know, you lost a bag of money. I lost a bag of £10,000. Yeah, and I thought it'd gone. And years went by. 10 years later, I found that money. That money was, I don't know, like someone came and said, oh, this bag, you left it. And they gave me that bag. I don't have to work out 10 years of that money. Wal abiq, and a runaway slave. So if, let's say, I had a slave, and that slave ran away. 10 years later, authorities caught that slave. I don't have to give zakat on that slave. Now remember, this slave is for selling purposes, not personal use. Personal use slaves, no zakat on it. Waddal, yeah, waddal, again, anything which is like lost. Like let's say I had camels, and some of my camels absconded and got lost. Again, if after I discover them after 10 years, I don't have to work out the zakat for that duration. وَالْمَغْصُوبُ إِذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ عَلَيْهِ بَيِّنَةٌ. And likewise, usurped wealth. So let's say someone, let's say for example, there's a guy called Zaid, and Zaid, he usurps from me something. He takes something from me and doesn't give it back. So this is not stealing. Again, a lot of students get confused when they hear the terms saraqa, and they hear the terms ghasab, and they hear like other like terms. So saraqa is a specific act which is stealing something that is done secretly from a place where the item is protected. Yes, so stealing something from a living person that's protected in a secret way. Whereas ghasab is actually like refusing to give something back to someone. Yeah, so this is called usurping. Yeah, so like I gave Zafar £1,000, and he's not giving me back. That's called now usurping now. Yeah. إِذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ عَلَيْهِ بَيِّنَةٌ. He mentions this part of this because what he means is that if Zayd was to do ghasab from me, so I gave him some money or I gave him some gold or thing and he's not giving back, he's a usurper, he's a ghasib. Now, إِذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ عَلَيْهِ بَيِّنَةٌ, so long as I don't have proof to prove that he's usurped it from me. Yeah. But if I do have proof and I'm in the process, years go by, I'm in the process, I have to give zakat of all those years. Yeah. So the idea is if I do have proof from day one, then I have to give the years, all those years. Okay, next, وَالْمَالَ السَّاقِطْ فِي الْبَحْرِ, and the wealth that has dropped in the ocean. So in the olden days, remember, people used to travel by sea, and then, sometimes like the ship used to get into, stormy weather, and then goods used to fall out the ship. Yeah, stuff like that used to happen. So al-mal al-saqit, and wealth that has fallen into the ocean. So I've got some goods on a ship. Ship is traveling, and all of a sudden it gets into stormy weather, and my goods fall out. And 10 years goes by, and it's lost. Then after 10 years, I find it. Yeah, so there's no zakat on it. Wal madfoon fil mafaza. So madfoon fil mafaza is goods that are buried, gold, silver, anything like that, any zakatable asset that is dafana, madfoon, in the wilderness. Mafaza means like a wilderness, in a desert somewhere. Yeah. Now the reason it's saying in a desert is as opposed to if you were to bury in private property. So let's say I went to my back garden and I buried something there, and I've lost where I buried it. I can't remember where I buried it. Yeah. There's an ikhtilaf between the Hanafis. Some Hanafis say there is zakat on it, some Hanafis no zakat on it. But the Rajih opinion is there is zakat on that because it's in your own property. Therefore, technically, it's not lost. It's just misplaced. Yeah, like you put something in one pocket and you forget. So, but this is if you were to bury it in some wilderness. إِذَا نَسِيَ مَكَانَهُ, when a person forgets its location. Clearly, if you know its location, then all those years has passed, you have to give zakat on it. Okay. وَالَّذِي أَخَذَهُ السُّلْطَانُ مُصَادَرَةً. So, and that wealth which the authorities, meaning the government, has taken forcefully, musadaratan means like forcefully from you. So musadaratan is basically like ghasab, but it's just if the government does it, it's called musadara. And they differentiate between normal ghasab and the musadara of the government, because the musadara of the government is with a threat, meaning that if you don't obey the government, there's a high chance that you're going to be killed, or you're going to be injured, or something like that. So that's why corrupt rulers sometimes would forcefully take people's wealth. It was known in the olden days, and it happens today as well in many countries, where corrupt rulers, for their own personal pleasure, they'll take people's wealth. They'll take their camels, or they'll take their whatever. So that wealth which has been forcefully taken by a sultan, by an authority, that is also considered to be mal-ud-dimar. Yeah. So if you get it back after 10 years, you manage to, the new government came in and you managed to get your stuff back, you don't have to give zakat on it. So these are just examples of some of the scenarios now. The idea, what does the whole mal-ud-dimar mean? The whole concept of mal-ud-dimar is basically based around the idea that you have ownership, but you don't have control over it. Like, you don't have access to it. Yeah, you don't have any way of, remember, there's no nama, there's no productivity. So this is the idea, that if you don't have control over it, therefore you're not getting any profits from it, you're not getting anything which is benefiting. So therefore it's as though, so nowadays, in today's times, there could be like new scenarios of this as well. Like, for example, let's say you have a property that was in Ukraine at the moment. So let's say you owned a property in Ukraine, and all of a sudden now the war's broken out, and this war carries on for several years. So that means you can't benefit from that. You can't get anything from that. Yeah. If the property was for sale, or you've got gold there, you've got silver there, all those years that pass, there's no zakat on it. Why? Because again, it's mal-ud-dimar. Likewise, for example, let's say you had assets and the government has frozen your assets. You got gold, you got cash in the bank, and the government stepped in and just for some reason frozen all your assets, and a court case is going on and years go by. Yeah, that could also be counted as mal-ud-dimar as well. I don't know, is there any other like modern example of mal-ud-dimar? I mean, I know a friend who actually had like, whether people consider Bitcoin to be zakatable or not, because National Zakat Foundation actually considers it to be zakatable. Yeah, they consider Bitcoin to be zakatable. This guy had Bitcoin and he lost it. So he had it on his phone, because you have to have a key, and he had it on an old phone and he lost that old phone. And then he actually found the old phone, but the battery didn't work, and that phone is now out of production and you can't get those batteries anymore. So it was like a long thing, and then many years later I think he was able to access it. Okay. Now, ووجوب الصدقة الفطر بسبب الآبق والضال والمغصوب على هذا الخلاف. Now, once we're talking about zakat, he says, why don't we talk about sadaqat al-fitr? So, if there's a person like me, and I have to give sadaqat al-fitr. Sadaqat al-fitr is the sadaqah that you give on Eid day. So Eid al-Fitr, that sadaqah that you give, I have to give it on my behalf, and if I have children who are minors, I have to give it on their behalf, and I have to give it on behalf of any slaves I have. Yeah? So I have to give it on behalf of these three people: myself, minor children, and slave. Yeah? So he says, what if you have a slave that's run away? Yeah, you have a slave that's run away, and then 10 years later you find that slave. Do you have to give sadaqat al-fitr of all those 10 years? So he said, this is the same ikhtilaf. Zufar and Shafi say yes, you have to, and the rest of the Hanafi say no. What dal, and likewise lost property. So like, for example, dal as in it could be, I'm trying to think what would the it has to be not animal, it has to be human. Like absconded, so lost. I've got a slave and he hasn't run away, he's just got lost. Yeah. And the same ikhtilaf. And maghsoob as well. So a slave that has been usurped. 10 years goes by, I get that slave back. Do I have to backdate all the years of zakat? Sadaqat al-fitr rather? Hanafi say no, Zufar and Shafi say yes. Ala had al-khilaf. Yeah, based upon the same ikhtilaf here. So you can see what they're doing. Zufar and Shafi are looking at the original concept of ownership. As long as ownership is still there, They're saying that yes, there is. Once ownership ceases, they're saying there's no longer an obligation of zakat and sadaqat al-fitr. But the other Hanafis say no, it's not just ownership, it's the access to that. It's the access to be able to benefit from it. That's what they're saying. Because that seems to be the main reason why zakat is necessary. It's not just ownership. Because you could own something, but if it's not mal nami. Anyway, lahuma. So the Shafi's and Zufr's argument, anna sabab qad tahaqqaqa. The sabab is there. Like we said, when zakat comes, what's the sabab for zakat being necessary? It's clearly mal, isn't it? Mal. Right, you got mal, and that's it. Anna sabab qad tahaqqaqa. The sabab has been found. Right? And what else do you want? Fawatul yad, and the loss of possession, غير مخل. This is something that does not disrupt the ruling. It has no effect on the ruling. Yeah. Do you have an example of this? Yeah. Like for example, let's say Ibn Sabil, mal of Ibn Sabil. Yeah, the mal of Ibn Sabil. So let's say for example, like there is a traveler. I'm a traveler. I've gone on a journey. Yeah. I've gone on a journey for 2 or 3 years. Yeah, I don't know, I'm just wandering around somewhere. Do I have to give zakat of the money I've left at home in my bank account? Right? I don't have access to it, but do I have to give zakat? And they say, yeah. Everyone says, yes, you have to. So they say, look, am I owner? Yes, I'm owner. Do I have access to it? No, I don't. So why do you have to give zakat on that? Can you see the resemblance? So they're saying, you're contradicting your own rule here. Yeah. So they're saying, as long as you have ownership, possession isn't really important, they're saying. Like the mal of Ibn Sabi, like the money that the traveler has left at home, and he's gone on a journey, he doesn't have access to it. Okay, what's our response to Imam Shafi? Lana qawlu Ali. So first of all, our statement is the statement of Ali, which is an athar. La zakata fi mal-ud-dimar. There is no zakat at all when it comes to the mal of dimar. So this kind of like idea of money that's lost all hope. And the logical or the rational argument is لأن السبب. What is the real sabab for why zakat becomes necessary? It's mal nami, isn't it? It's productive wealth. Okay, right. ولا نماء إلا بالقدرة. This is the good point the Hanafis come out with. The really kind of deep point here, which is there is no nama, there is no concept of productivity if you don't have a kudra to use it. Kudra al-tasarruf. Yeah. Remember we talked about this idea of ownership. And we said ownership is only considered to be complete when you have the power to be able to use it. And we gave the example of the mukatab when we talked about the mukatab, if you remember. And we said the mukatab, he is not considered to be a full owner of the money that he's acquired because he doesn't have full tasarruf. He can't free a slave. Yeah. So over here he's saying basically it's malun nami, and that malun nami can only be considered productive if you have kudra to use it. وَلَا قُدْرَةَ عَلَيْهِ. And clearly, in all these scenarios that we mentioned, lost property and dal, maqsoob, and water, money that's dropped in the water, etc., there is no ability for that person to be able to use it. Yeah. So see how that sort of like very nuanced they become in this masala. And this is what the Hanafis were well known for. They were well known for really kind of like using you can almost say like a microscopic approach to masail. And another good example that I like is where the Hanafis talk about the masla of tayammum, where they say, for example, like in tayammum, when can you do tayammum? They say, when you don't have water, lam tajidu ma'an. But they say, really, is it there's no water? Or is it the ability not to use the water? Yeah. So they say, really, lam tajidu is lam ta'lamu, that you don't know there's water there. And then lam ta'lamu results in lam taqdiru. So the idea is you can only resort to tayammum not because there's no water, it's because you don't have the ability to use that water. And then they break down ability to 2 types. Qadir haqiqatan and qadir ajzan. Qadir hukman. And then the opposite of qadir is ajiz. Ajiz haqiqatan, ajiz hukman. I don't want to I know this is probably going to go over your heads. Or do you understand what I'm saying? So would we say that the traveler has kudra over his money at home due to having kudra to return? No. So that's what they're saying. They're not talking about kudra in the long term. Yeah. So in the long run, he's going to go back home, isn't he? So what they're saying basically is that this guy has to give zakat, not backdate. He has to give zakat even though he's there by appointing someone to give the zakat. Does that make sense? So they're not talking about kudra. They're not saying by kudra. They're saying as long as he has ownership, he is eligible. He is obligated to give zakat. That's it. How does he give zakat? That's up to him. Yeah, he should have appointed someone at home, saying, "Look, if I don't come back, then please give this much zakat, or send a letter home, or anything like that." That's what it is. Yeah, and this so this is the argument. Then this is our response. Ibn Sabil yaqdir binaibihi. The traveler does have the ability. He has kudra, but through his naib, through his representative at home, his wife or his children or some other family friend member. Yeah, he can do that. So this is why the argument it boils down to this idea of, when we're talking about this idea of ownership, we're talking about real ownership that results in kudra to be able to use it. Yeah, and I think that's a very deep point. Like, you don't see this in the Quran. Like, you can't see the word kudra in the Quran or in the hadith where this is pointed out. But this was like the Hanafis really kind of pointing this out. Okay. Okay, I think we'll stop there. Yeah. Although I know it's not really kind of but I just want to kind of stop there, and I think I'll repeat that previous masala again in the next lesson. Yeah, because it's all about trying to understand how the Hanafis look at things. That's what you want to understand. How the Imam Zufar and Shafi, when we say, for instance, like they are looking at this masala and are they like, can't they see this? Clearly, they would have known the discussion. They would have understood that there is a discussion of kudra, but they didn't base it on kudra. They're saying, well, kudra is not important. Yeah, the idea is that this masala, they're saying basically, as long as you got ownership, that is the main thing. This is why sometimes, for instance, like, we might read Hanafi works and we might see Imam Zufar and say, Imam Zufar, how can Imam Zufar not have known this? If Imam Zufar had known this, I guarantee you he would have left his opinion. If Imam Shafi had known this, he would have left his opinion. That's not necessarily true. We only bring the opponent's positions, or we only bring their statements just to make ourselves more clear about our own positions. Remember that. We don't bring our positions to counter their positions, to show the weakness of their positions. And I remember once one of our teachers, he said, there was a teacher in Darul Uloom Deoband, Sheikh Anwar Shah Kashmiri, and a scholar came from some Arab scholar came, and someone said that, mashallah, our teacher explains the Hanafi madhab so well that if Imam Shafi was here today in our gathering, Imam Shafi would have become Hanafi. So Sheikh Anwar Shah got upset and he said, how dare you say that? He said, if Imam Shafi was here today, I would have accepted Imam Shafi's opinions. Yeah, now that is a really respectful statement, that is, because that shows that the whole discussion that we have is not like to kind of debase the other opponent and show, look how weak he is. He didn't think about this. He didn't think about this. Didn't think about this. And if we actually read the Shafi work, sometimes you'd be amazed at how the Shafis look at their dalil. Yeah, because their approach is different. So their dalil, according to their approach, is very strong. Anyway. Okay. Was there anything that I wanted to mention? Let's have a look. Okay, there was one thing that, although this doesn't really kind of come in Hidayah, but I thought I'd just sort of just touch on it, which is the idea of when we say, for example, like something becomes for the intention of tijara. We're going to discuss this more in detail when we do urud. Okay, so don't worry about it too much now. He does go into this idea of like, when does intention become effective and when is it non-effective? Like, for example, if I'm praying salat and in my head I intend I've broken my salat, has my salat become broken or not? Yeah. So he goes into a good discussion in Radd al-Muhtar. He goes into a good discussion about this whole idea of what it means to actually make an intention. And the same goes for wealth. So, for example, if you acquire wealth Let's say, for example, there's a lady and she's getting married, and her husband has promised her that he's going to give her a car, and so she has already made an intention that when I get this car, I'm going to sell it off. Yeah. So now, does that item now become a commodity? Does that intention, is that sufficient enough for it to become a commodity of sale, or a business stock? So he's got a good discussion on there. And because we're not doing urud, we haven't done urud yet, I won't really go into much detail. I'll go into detail when we talk about that. So that was one thing that you can read up. The other thing, although it doesn't mention it here, which is the idea of, if you give someone your wealth, like for example, let's say you gave me, I'm collecting money for orphans or some poor people, and you know, all of you guys, 10 people, you give me your zakat money to give. So now how does that work then? Can you change your intention so long as they haven't used it? So that's generally the rule. The rule is that as long as they have not used it, as long as the poor people have not received it and used that money, your intention is still subject to change. So let's say you gave money with the intention of, I don't know, just charity. But then later on you decided, I want to make that into zakat. You can change your intention so long as they haven't used that money. Yeah, and sometimes this is a good thing to note, because let's say, I don't know, you've given your money to, let's say, Ummah Welfare Trust, yeah, to hand over to the poor. So when Ummah Welfare have it, they are wakil on your behalf. So long as you know they've got it and they haven't given it to the poor, your intention can actually change. Yeah, so you can change it from just a normal charity to zakat, or the vice versa, opposite way around as well. Yeah, so that's, and he also discusses the issue of, is the wakil allowed to take different types of zakat and mix them all together? Yeah, mix different people's wealth together, as is done by charities today when they put it all into one account. So the rule is no, unless implicit or explicit permission has been given. So, and he gives a good argument. He says, even if in the urf, people understand it's okay. Like today's times, people understand that when you give your money to a charity, it's okay because they're going to mix it anyway and you don't really mind that. Then it's fine. Yeah. Is it possible for you to send that discussion, please? Yes, I'll send these notes, inshallah. They're all like scattered, so you just have to keep reading through it. Okay, so that was one of the discussions. Okay, was there anything else? Yeah, I think that was it really. If we use the masdar wajad instead of wujud, it would mean to feel or sense. Could this meaning have been implied by the verse of tayammum, e.g., and you do not feel the water? I haven't come across it anyway. It seems very quite far-fetched. Yeah. So they usually use the word wijdan. Yeah, wijdan. Lam tajidu ma, you don't feel the water, no. That seems like a very far interpretation. I mean, this is why you need to understand. Remember I was telling you guys before in main lessons ago, when you're learning fiqh, you need to understand how the people in the days of the Sahaba understood the ayats of the Quran. Like, how did they understand what wajda means and what's its application over here? So that's why we learn classical Arabic, we learn Arabic poetry and these sciences in order for us to understand. And the fuqaha, alhamdulillah, have preserved for us a lot of the meanings. Okay, let's just summarize, and if you have any questions, you can put it in the bottom. So we discussed the issue with regards to hawaj al-asliyah. Yeah, so any assets that you have, which are your normal assets, you need, like, you could have expensive clothing, expensive watches, expensive car, flashy house, and all that. There's no zakat on it, as long as it's for your hawaj al-asliyah. Now, clearly, if it's extravagance, that's a separate issue, that is. Extravagance is between you and Allah, and that's something that you're going to have to answer to Allah. But we're talking about from a legal sense, from a authority. How do the authority see this? So this is why there could be someone who drives a very flashy car, but they're still, eligible for receiving zakat. And we said furniture and all these things, and even things like tools that people use. And that's why if you want to work out, like in a business, if you want to work out what aspects of a business you have to give zakat on, there's only two things in a business you have to give zakat on. liquid assets usually means cash, and number 2, inventory, stock and inventory, anything that's been bought and sold. So if you want to work out shares, for example, how do you work out shares? If you got shares in Apple or you got shares in Google, how do you work out how much zakat you owe? So what you do is you ask them for, because you're a shareholder, you ask them for how much liquid assets they have, and you ask them for how much inventory they have, right? Like selling items. So Google may have phones, right? They might have laptops, and you find out how much they have, and then according to how much percentage of shares you own, that's how much you're going to give zakat on now, right? So if you own, let's say, I don't know, which is obviously a strange, made up figure, 1% of Google, right? 1% of Google. And Google's whole assets, out of everything they own is worth, let's say, £1 billion. But the zakatable assets are only £1 million. So 1 billion and 1 million. Yeah. So all you have to work out is your like 1% of 1 million. That's all you have to work out. So 1% of 1 million, that's all you give zakat. You don't have to worry about anyone else's zakat. Now, if you can't work this out, because sometimes what happens is you might have investments in lots of stocks, like ISAs and things like that. Then what do? Then in that case, National Zakat Foundation actually have given a fatwa that you can use a 25% benchmark. So they've gone through the FTSE 100. So FTSE 100 are the top 100 companies in the UK which are trading on the stock exchange, and these are like these big names, and they found that each one of them, they've gone through them and found out how much liquid assets and how much inventory they have. And they found, at best, we found the most that a company possibly has is 25%, of the business. So that's how they work it. And they say, if you want to work it out much more, like I know I did a calculation for one guy, he owned shares in BT, and BT literally had hardly anything, right, in the liquid assets and compared to the value of the company. So his share worked out to be like 0 point something pennies, like it was almost nothing. So again, you have to work out what the Hawaij Asli are, the fixed assets and the liquid assets, etc. Okay, and we also talked about the idea of if a person has mal-ud-dimar. Mal-ud-dimar, the example they give is like a person who owes money and they deny it, and then after many years, the rightful owner is able to provide evidence in court, and then he gets it back. Does he have to backdate all the years? So the Zahir Riwayah says no. And Zufar and Shafi say yes. Their argument is based upon, they say, ownership is the main thing. Whereas the Hanafi say, no, ownership is not the main thing. It's actually ownership with the kudra to be able to use it. Okay, we'll stop there. Ji, any questions? No. Alright guys, Jazakallah khair, and I'll see you on Monday. Assalamu alaikum.